We're very pleased and honored to have with us today the Honourable J. Weatherill, who is Premier of the state of South Australia. Premier Weatherill is a lawyer by training, studied at the University of Adelaide. Adelaide is home country. He was elected to the House of Assembly, the state parliament in South Australia in 2002, and was re-elected to his fourth term just recently. During his time as a member of Parliament, the House of Assembly, he's served in many different ministerial capacities, including having the portfolio of environment and conservation at one point during his career. He became Premier just 2 years ago in March 2014. And I should just add, we at Carnegie Mellon are very proud of the fact that one of our international campuses, one of our few campuses, is in Adelaide. We've enjoyed a very warm and valuable relationship with the City of Adelaide, the state of South Australia, and the leadership of the state. And that the Premier is here is just one more statement of that. We're very pleased to have you here. Please join me in welcoming Premier J. Weatherill.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cohen. Thank you for the warmth of the welcome that you've given both me and my delegation here in Pittsburgh during the course of the week. We were given a wonderful set of presentations yesterday. President Suresh was very warm in his welcome. But really, what we've learned over the last 24 hours has inspired us to really take further steps in this direction that I'm about to speak about, that is tackling the question of climate change. It was also wonderful to hear from you, Dr. Cohen, about the work of the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation. And when we learned about the priorities for action of that institute, once again it excited us, because the very things that you're working on, the very challenges that you're seeking to solve, are the very things that we're grappling with in South Australia. I should also acknowledge that Dr. Cohen was the former president of Carnegie Mellon at the time when we established this relationship with South Australia, and we're so proud of the relationship that we enjoy with Carnegie Mellon, and it's wonderful to be able to publicly acknowledge that on this occasion. Well, Carnegie Mellon established 10 years ago in Adelaide, and the relationship has been one which has been very successful. And establishing a campus right in the geographical heart of my state's capital in Adelaide has allowed us to really imagine relationships across the globe, and this is an example of that. Hundreds of US, Australian and other students have graduated from the school with master's degrees in IT and public policy and management. And so it's been a wonderful way in which we can build connections between Pittsburgh and Adelaide, between South Australia and Pennsylvania. One area of collaboration that we have been exploring is this question of autonomous cars, and I had the opportunity yesterday to drive around in one, which was a slightly hair-raising experience, but it was extraordinary to see the way in which things have progressed here with this technology. We pride ourselves in South Australia as being the first place in the Southern Hemisphere to undertake driverless car trials, and we presently have legislation before the South Australian Parliament which is directed at ensuring that our regulatory regimes are able to accommodate driverless cars. But this is the first time I've experienced a driverless car on an open road, and it is amazing how far the technology has advanced. Another area of enormous potential, and the thing that I do want to dwell on today in my discussion, is this question of climate change. Obviously, we're all appraised of the significance of this issue for the global community. And it is one of these issues which, because of its nature, is global in nature, it demands global solutions. And so this relationship that's been formed between Adelaide and Pittsburgh, between Carnegie Mellon and the tertiary institutions here in South Australia, is a natural response to what is an international phenomenon. Today I'll be announcing an initiative that promises to further bring the relationship between South Australia and Pennsylvania even closer together to find practical solutions to these issues. But the first thing I want to talk about is just some information about my state. Many of you may not be familiar with South Australia, so I would like to just outline what it looks like and some of the measures that we're presently putting in place to tackle climate change. South Australia is a big state. It's, we like to say, bigger than Texas. It's certainly about 8 times larger than the Pennsylvania area. But it's home to only 1.7 million people, and most of those are contained within the Adelaide urban form, which is about 1.3 million people. It is the driest state and the driest inhabited continent anywhere on the planet. And this summer, the one that's just ended in Australia, brought with it many days with temperatures above 100 degrees, as is often the case, and with devastating and lethal bushfires, which have ravaged urban areas just north of Adelaide. So it is a harsh and unforgiving environment, and the effects of climate change, especially rising temperatures, are brutally obvious to us. And so there's a real and urgent imperative for us to address this issue. In 2014, it was our second hottest year on record, and across Australia, 7 of our country's 10 warmest years on record have been experienced since 2002. So we understand the effect of climate change and its capacity to threaten some of our basic sectors of our economy. A mainstay of the South Australian economy is our food industry. We're a massive grain producer, a massive meat producer, seafood producer. All of these things become threatened by a changing climate. Another piece of context about South Australia, on the economic front, South Australia does face a number of challenges, perhaps not the scale and the depth of the challenges that faced Pittsburgh in the mid-80s, but nevertheless qualitatively similar challenges. The deindustrialisation of the South Australian economy. Next year, General Motors will pull out a large manufacturing plant in South Australia, so that will be a massive shock to the regional economy. And it really comes after a period of a couple of decades of a manufacturing industry which has been in decline as a consequence of the internationalisation of the Australian economy. So falling tariff walls, freer trade, competition from cheaper overseas imports has led to a deindustrialisation, but at the same time a growth of advanced manufacturing. So these two simultaneous forces that are at work. And the South Australian economy is going through a massive period of churn, so simultaneous creation and destruction, more jobs being created than those lost, but it is a race against time as those declining industries accelerate their decline. So we're now wanting to move up the value chain into advanced manufacturing, and really the pattern that we've observed here in Pittsburgh is a pattern that we find very persuasive. So Pittsburgh, I think mid-80s, something like 20% unemployment. Now you have one of the lowest levels of unemployment anywhere in the nation at 4.3%. And with the technology jobs comprising about 23% of the Pittsburgh economy and yielding wages in the order of about 30% of the Pittsburgh economy. So this is a massive achievement over a relatively short period of time, and the transformation has come off the back of investments in advanced manufacturing. And critically, the relationship between universities and business and government. And that's something that we've been incredibly inspired by in the last few days. And at the centre of that is Carnegie Mellon and its relationship with the industry and with the local authorities here. We have a range of high-tech opportunities for us to participate. We are a very substantial element of the nation's defence effort. We have about a quarter of the nation's defence procurement that happens in South Australia, even though we're about 7% of the nation's population. So we have a tradition of involving ourselves in high-tech manufacturing, such as a shipbuilding industry and in particular the submarine sector. So the way in which we're seeking to approach the question of climate change is in that context, in the context of a state which is threatened by climate change, so its imperatives, as we all are, but a particular threat given the nature of our climate and its harshness, but also an economy which is needing to make this transition from essentially old manufacturing to new manufacturing. So the way we want to construct our response to grappling with climate change is to see it as an opportunity, not just as a threat. And interestingly, when we were in Paris late last year at the COP21 conference, this was the emerging theme that we saw across the whole of the world. Climate change, of course, is a threat, but increasingly businesses and governments are seeing it as an opportunity. Having established the imperative for change, people's thoughts are now quickly moving to the way in which this could be seen as an opportunity for growth and prosperity in economies. So we've made very significant efforts to foster a renewable energy sector in South Australia, and the efforts that we're yielding in both economic and environmental terms are impressive. It's been underpinned by legislation. In 2007, my state passed Australia's first climate change laws, which laid down what we thought at that time were ambitious targets for establishing renewable energy. 20% of our energy to be constructed of renewable energy by 2020. This embedded emissions reductions targets in law and enshrined a renewable energy generation target. And our supporting policy and regulatory frameworks have provided the transparency and certainty to send a message to investors to come to South Australia in relation to these questions. And the impact has been remarkable. Today, we have not only passed the 20% target, we adjusted it to 33%, and we've now passed through that. We're at 41%. We've now adjusted that to 50%, and it appears that this year we're currently at 41% of our energy produced from renewables resources, and later this year we expect to reach 50% of our energy being produced through renewable sources. This rapid growth in our sector has generated about $6.6 billion in new investment and created thousands of new jobs. It's been particularly focused on wind energy. Though we have 7%, as I said, of the Australian population, we have 35% of the nation's installed wind capacity. If South Australia were a nation in its own right, it would be second highest market penetration of wind in the world, behind only Denmark. And we also have a very substantial penetration of solar panels on residential rooftops. 1 in 4 South Australian households have solar panels on their roofs. So we are achieving significant gains in relation to renewable energy. In other areas, about 80% of our waste that would normally go to landfill now goes to recycling, the highest rate in Australia. And we've also taken other steps which have led to greater levels of recycling. We have container deposit legislation, we've banned single-use plastic bags. All of those have an important effect on the reduction of emissions, and resource efficiency has improved as a consequence. We've also been able to demonstrate that you can have both economic growth and emissions reductions. These two things are not mutually exclusive, and between 1990 and 2012-13, for example, South Australia reduced its emissions by 9% in absolute terms, yet increased the size of its economy by 60%. So we have decoupled economic growth from carbon emissions. Put simply, the measures that we've undertaken have been both good for our planet but also good for our economy. So obviously pursuing this goal just in South Australia or even just in Australia doesn't make sense. This is a global problem that requires a global solution. And so South Australia has reached out and has sought to internationalise its efforts in this regard. Our state has long been a member of the Climate Group's States and Regions Alliance, which is basically a gathering of about 35 subnational governments working together at the coalface of climate change policy. The premise of our work is that these kinds of jurisdictions, places like South Australia, Connecticut, the Basque Country in Spain, Rio de Janeiro, are generally better able to achieve practical results than national governments. National governments tend to become paralysed by these big questions about whether we should be putting a price on carbon and the difficulty in being able to align constituencies to support them to do that, even though there's an international consensus that that is the most effective and efficient way of grappling with reductions in carbon emissions. But if you look at the real action that needs to be taken to reduce emissions, it is in stationary energy arrangements, it is in transport systems, it is in building energy efficiency, it is in waste, and all of those systems, generally speaking, fall to subnational governments to govern and superintend. So it is cities and regions that can make a massive difference here. So the leadership that has been shown by States and Regions Alliance was lauded by the Secretary-General in the United Nations at the recent Climate Change Conference in December. More importantly, our work has earned a place at the policy-making and negotiation table, which is an important step forward. So we are encouraging policymakers at a city and a state level to become involved in the work of subnational governments on climate change, and we'd like to invite more states and regions and cities to join these alliances, these international alliances which are gathering momentum. Yes, South Australia has found places like Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania can make a tangible difference. They can make a difference to the health and future of the planet and to, obviously, the health and well-being of their local citizens. What I want to do, though, is to outline the next steps that we're taking. We have a comprehensive climate change policy in South Australia. It is a policy which is directed at setting bold targets. Our climate change strategy from 2015 to 20 that we released late last year sets out an ambitious goal for us to be carbon neutral by 2050. It also sets out a further incredibly ambitious goal, which is to be the world's first carbon neutral city, the City of Adelaide, our capital city. And what we've done is we've formed a partnership between our regional government and the city government to achieve this goal. What it will require us to do is to even take further our capacity to generate renewable energy, build green industries, increase resource efficiency, improve waste management, and also move to very different forms of public transport. Among other things, the plan will make hybrid and electric cars the preferred mode of transport in our central business district. What this sends is a clear and bold message to businesses and industries around the world. And the message is that if you want to innovate, if you want to perfect low carbon technologies necessary to halt global warming, come to South Australia. So our citizens are persuaded about the threat. What we want to do, though, is not paralyse them by that threat. We want to excite them about the opportunity. We want them to be proud of the fact that their state, their region, their city can be a leader in this regard. And we know that as much as we've done at a state level and a city level, there is so much more to know. We have an enormous amount to learn from a world which is grappling with these issues. And just as we saw earlier today in looking at the work of your institute, there is so much going on around the world that are seeking to grapple with these questions. So in line with this approach, I'm very pleased to announce an initiative that the students of Carnegie Mellon and the people of Pittsburgh can get involved in. I want to launch today a program called South Australia's Low Carbon Entrepreneur Prize. It's the first initiative in our Adelaide to Zero Carbon Neutral Adelaide Challenge. We are constructing a series of initiatives now to assist us to reach this goal of being the world's first carbon neutral city. In simple terms, it's an international call for innovative solutions and an opportunity to translate ideas into action. It is perfectly suited to a university like Carnegie Mellon, which so much of its tradition is based on translating ideas and research into action. That's why I wanted to announce it here, to pay respect to the relationship that we've developed with Carnegie Mellon, but also to acknowledge the wonderful work of this institution. We're inviting people from around the world, including Pittsburgh, to devise and then carry out low-carbon projects in South Australia. Businesses, community groups, startups and individuals are all eligible to take part. The successful finalists will share in a total prize pool of $250,000 Australian dollars. And they'll have the opportunity to visit South Australia and demonstrate how the project will work. Participants will be asked to submit ideas to reduce Adelaide's carbon emissions in the following 4 areas: energy, transport, waste and livability. So if you're interested in the Low Carbon Entrepreneur Prize and want to learn more, we've got some flyers that we'll be sending around later today. The leaflet gives you the address of the prize website where you can submit your ideas. Entries are open for the project from today and close on the 30th of May. And one of the particular forces that we seek to unlock by putting this challenge out there, this prize out there, is to, of course, collaborate with the best and brightest minds around the world, but also to bring them to South Australia in a way that will allow them to collaborate with our local researchers. And we're also, in creating this challenge and this prize, we've also sought to mobilise the local players and actors which will be essential to achieving successful action on climate change. So local universities, local energy suppliers, local businesses that have an interest in the technologies that might be part of the solution, but also local communities and local actors such as our city council as well as our civic leaders. So there is an opportunity to be part of something very new, something very different, which we understand does not have a precedent anywhere in the world. It will help us achieve our goal of becoming the world's first carbon neutral city. It will foster ideas that can be pursued not just in my state, but in Pennsylvania and in all places around the world. And indirectly, it will have, I think, an important role in strengthening the ties between South Australia and the Carnegie Mellon University. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it has been a real pleasure to say a few words to you today to help kick off today's discussions on policy. The Scott Institute should be commended, I think, for bringing together people from across disciplines. If there's one thing that we've learnt in the few days that we've had an opportunity to speak to representatives of Carnegie Mellon, it's that there is a massive and impressive commitment to working across disciplines to find the solutions to difficult problems through people lifting their gaze and making connections and seeing the world in new ways. I wish the Institute all the best in what I'm sure will become a successful and rewarding Energy Week. We love being a partner of Carnegie Mellon, and I look forward to working with the university, attracting many of you to come to South Australia. It's a beautiful place to be. At around this time of the year, it runs what is one of the world's great festivals of music and live art and comedy, all wrapped up in a beautiful climate, surrounded by beautiful parklands with some of the world's best wine and food. You're more than welcome to come to South Australia and to Adelaide to enjoy that experience, but also help us achieve these worthy international goals. Thank you very much.